Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on developing your IP strategy and startups through corporate strategic alliances. So today is July 26th, and we are featuring in today's webinar Pepsico, who will talk about their technology needs and what startups they're looking for from universities. So hopefully you get to learn a lot more about what PepsiCo needs, and we hope you enjoy this afternoon's webinar. But before we begin, I'd like to tell the audience a little bit more about what we're doing with the startups and how we are um, bringing them in as part of the third University Startups Demo Day. So our next demo day is on October 16 and 17, and at that event we are highlighting three main programs. One is the University Startups Demo Day itself, where universities submit companies to us, startup companies, to gain presentation slots, and these companies are scored by members of our corporate selection committee. The second portion of the demo day is what we call the IP to Startup program. It is a new program where we ask universities to submit IP patents or technologies, also to be scored by corporates. And the idea here is that early on, the universities will be able to tell whether or not their IP or patents have market relevance. Those patents or IP that are scored highly will be included in a book, an IP book that will be distributed to and sent to corporate members. And the last part of the demo day on October 16 and 17, this is for later stage companies that are looking for VC funding. So this is part of our American Chinese University Growth Fund. It's a $1 billion fund where we are working with VCs in China to fund university startups as part of the development work that we do with companies that go through the demo day. So I hope I hope like through any of these programs, like the universities or the startups on the call, would be able to find a stage that works for them when they submit the information to us for scoring. Uh, just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. We will have Q&A at the end of the session. So in order for you to ask questions, all you need to do is type on your questions box of your GoToWebinar control panel, and your questions will be handled after Austin completes his presentation. Also, this session is being recorded, so if you have colleagues that you think would be interested in this webinar or in this webinar series, you can just go to the link. You can register there and you can bookmark that link, because that's where the slides and video will be available 24 to 48 hours after the webinar concludes. You can also watch more of the videos, like webinar archives and some briefings that we've done over the last few months, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, so you could get more information or updates if we have new videos that are uploaded. So the deadline, the early deadline, or rather the early and the first deadline, is on July 14th for you to submit your startups or your IP. And again, both startups and IP will be scored by members of our corporate selection committee. So hopefully you make the first deadline. It's always good to be part of the first batch, because that gives us enough time to review your submission and to catch errors, or to connect with you earlier, so that way you can improve on your submission if you find anything that can be improved. With that said, we always encourage the universities to submit early. It's always been a practice that those universities or those startups that submit early get scored better, mainly because we think we have that flexibility to work with the startup to check the application and to make corrections if needed. All right. So without further ado, I will turn it over now to our speaker today. So his name is Dr. Austin Cosman. So he is the Director of External Innovation and Alliance Management at PepsiCo. So for those who are, I'm sure everyone is aware what PepsiCo is, but basically Austin is here to talk about, their different companies, what they're looking for, especially for their core businesses, such as ingredients, sensors, analytical equipment, or POS equipment, or pu- as part of their distribution and their fleet. So I won't keep you any further. Austin, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the great introduction.
All right, so I'll pull up your slides now, and you can begin once you see your title slide up.
Okay. Well, while that's being pulled up, I just want to give everybody a brief intro into myself. I do lead the alliance management portion of our external innovation group, and my team's remit, besides doing technology scouting with all our tech scouts for specific wants, and you'll see some of those later in this deck, but really my team is building our partner ecosystem. So when we look to collaborate external from PepsiCo, we're always collaborating with the world leader in a particular area or subject matter expertise. And we've now been we've been with NSIT since the start in 2015. Someone from my team went to the first demo day, and we were impressed with the quality of institutions there and the startups that we saw. And so since then, I've joined the selection committee, and I've been on the selection committee for the last 2 years. And I think NSIT 2 is one of the primary ways we source university technology and startups. So again, I would encourage you all, as Ria said, to attend and apply early. With that, we can move to my first slide. I'll briefly discuss, for those that aren't familiar with PepsiCo, spend a little bit of time at the front end of the presentation detailing who we are and how our research and development organization functions, but then we'll spend the bulk of the presentation really discussing some of our top level technological wants and needs that hopefully your technologies can assist in. Next slide, please. PepsiCo is the second largest food and beverage company in the world. In 2016, we had $63 billion in revenue. We have 22 brands that sell over $1 billion in revenue a year across our three major categories, which are global beverages, global snacks, and global nutrition. You can see some of the iconic brands in our portfolios on this slide. We currently operate in over 200 countries around the world with more than 250,000 employees globally. On any given day, we are interacting with 1.2 billion consumers on a daily basis. Our CEO is always fond of pushing R&D to what about the other 5 billion people we don't interact with? So a big challenge to say the least. Next slide, please. PepsiCo was formed in 1965 when Pepsi Cola and Frito-Lay merged. And so we have a strong brand portfolio. Many of you probably recognize many of these brands. So we have 22, as I mentioned, that net over that have gross sales of over $1 billion annually. Some of those brands, like you'll see Starbucks, obviously we don't own Starbucks, but we are their partner for any of their ready-to-drink coffees that you see in grocery stores and other retail outlets outside the actual Starbucks store. We are their partner on those. But you can also see on the right-hand side of the slide, we have many brands that are growing and are quickly approaching becoming a billion-dollar brand, whether they be Naked Juice, Sabra Hummus, Rose Gold Pretzels, Stacy Pita Chips, and many more. Next slide, please. This slide's just to give you an idea of where we are in relevance to our competitive set inside some of our most important categories. Salty snacks were the number one company in that space, mainly because of Frito-Lay. So you have Lay's, Doritos, Cheetos, and Lay's may be called something different in different countries. It's called Sabritas down in Latin America and Mexico. It's called Walkers in Europe. But the Sun brand, that brand of potato chips and salty snacks, is actually the world's biggest food brand with annual revenues of greater than $12 billion. With our Quaker Oats brand of hot cereal as well as ready-to-eat cereal, but Quaker is number one in hot cereal, so oatmeal and other porridge-type cereals. Gatorade and the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, which does the foundational applied research into nutrition science and hydration science, leads to Gatorade being the number one in sports and hydration drinks. We're currently number two in juice and juice drinks with Tropicana, Naked, many of our juice brands. And we're number two in carbonated soft drinks with Mountain Dew, 7-Up, Sierra Mist, Miranda, and our flagship Pepsi. Next slide, please. When we look at new product development, we're really, besides following the insights and trying to meet an unmet consumer need as far as product and packaging delivery, we also look at something we call consumer demand moments, and it's really looking at when our consumers engage throughout the day with various products in our product portfolio. So you look at your daily activities. Normally there's a prepare step in the morning, typically associated with the breakfast meal occasion, where you're trying to get nutrients to energize you to start your day. Then in the middle portions of the day is really where you want to perform and sustain, whether you're anything from a student or some of our performance athletes with Gatorade, but many of us that perform means either working in an office environment or some other work environment. But then as we complete the day and return home, we can have some connect opportunities where we're really sharing a jovial moment, whether it be a party or a barbecue, those type of things with friends and family and loved ones. But on many nights, it's also our time to reset. So we want to wind down so we can get some good sleep to restart that process on the next day. So we're really trying to look at unmet needs and specific demand moments to deliver differentiated products for our consumers. Next slide, please. In 2015, we shifted the way our R&D organization was organized. Prior to 2015, we were in a sector-based model. So you had PepsiCo America's Foods, PepsiCo America Beverage. You had our European sector, which was food and beverage, and our Asia, Middle East, and Africa sector, which was food and beverage as well. It worked well for many years, but the reason really for the change was to prevent duplication of activities. To give you an example, in 2014, we had a few different geographic regions working on a sweet potato snack. So we had a group in Australia working on it, a group in Brazil and South America, and then a group in the US. We're all working on similar type products. They would communicate, but there was not a single overall platform focus. And so to prevent those duplication of efforts and ensuring we get the best assets on the best projects, we went more to a category-based model. So we have our product development categories. So we have our beverage group, our snacks, and our nutrition group, which is where Indra Nooyi, our CEO, has been very vocal about expanding that business. We're going to grow it to $30 billion by 2030. And so that includes beverages and food. So it's the more nutritious part of our portfolio, the good for you type of products, whether it be juice, oatmeal, dairy, things like that. The bottom three functions are support functions and support categories. So our strategy and portfolio management, which is actually where my team sits, in external innovation, that group makes sure that we're working on the the highest priority projects, and that those projects are allocated uh, with enough resources to do them in the time frame required. The global functions group is when we had the sector-based model, every sector had their own sensory science team, their own analytical team, their own food safety and quality team. But now that it's truly a global model with categories, that all those support functions are now in their single category, and we can again allocate those resources as required by the individual product categories. So it makes a much more efficient architecture to distribute those resources globally. The Dairy and Chocolate Center of Excellence, that is a hyper-focused research area, and we're not going to get into chocolate and compete on a confectionery, with Mars and Hershey's and companies of that magnitude. But really, as consumers look for more indulgent snacks, we have to look how chocolate applies as an ingredient into our uh, products. For example, a lot of our food distribution is not refrigerated, and as you can imagine, if you're near the equator or Texas, where I work, in the summer it can get quite warm, and so chocolate would melt in our typical distribution. So how can we get formulations that work in that type of distribution? And same sort of challenges with dairy. We're never going to compete with Danone, but we want to use dairy as an ingredient when it converges with oats in a drink, for example, to make sure that it provides the premium opportunity for our consumers. Next slide, please. When you look at the R&D model, and I show this slide just to give you a sense of how technology is commercialized through PepsiCo, the x-axis is business complexity, increasing to the right, and the y-axis is business impact, or basically the size of the prize or value to PepsiCo when ultimately commercialized, with increasing on the y-axis. So you can see typically the bigger the opportunity, the more complex that challenge is, and it comes into what we call our transformational science for our discovery teams. And so those are the teams that are working more on the R side of R&D, so doing more of the research and not as much as the product development. And it's really trying to understand that foundational science and take it through benchtop proof of principle all the way up to pilot scale sort of validation. At that pilot scale, then it starts handing off to the functional R&D teams to work through the different commercialization aspects. So typically the startups and technologies we source from universities come into those early stage discovery teams where we will do sponsored research with a university and do some joint work. As the technology moves towards commercialization, then it goes to our engineering and cross-functional partners, because they've done that scale up hundreds, if not thousands of times from the pilot scale, and now they're leveraging those unique capabilities and IP to create new product propositions that are differentiated from the current competition and then protected and insulated via the IP, whether it's a reframe or simply a refresh and new product flavor. Next slide, please. So R&D really impacts the whole supply chain. I like to say from seed to shelf. We look at innovations across that whole supply chain. So some of it is just simply reducing our usage and finding lower cost alternatives. But if you go to the next slide, we really focus on, spend the majority of our time in the center portion of that develop, make, move. We are looking for technologies. We've sourced some fuel economy for our distribution, or even some smart shelf technologies to help our merchandising and logistics. We have a crop science team that's looking at discovery, anything from biogenetics to alternative methods of doing irrigation to crop sensors. But we spend probably a majority of our time really looking at the center portion of this supply curve, which is really, when you look at our key business, it's taking raw ingredients in, adding value to those by processing them, and then packaging them for distribution. So really looking at ingredients, packaging, and processing are our three big areas. Next slide. Okay, next slide, please. So now we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the specific active technology briefs we're looking for. Next slide, please. With the discovery teams, we really try and focus on the big challenges. So in this 2x2 quadrant, we're really looking for the upper right corner. We're looking for high reward projects. We know they're very challenging. So if we do find a successful solution, we want it to be a big impact to the business. I'm definitely open to any lower right if it's low challenge, high reward. If you have something there, I would love to work on some of those low hanging fruits as well. But over the last 50 to 60 years, we've plucked most of those clean. So typically, most of our projects are the sort of high risk, high reward. Next slide, please. I think most of our opportunities can be classified into four large buckets. The first is really around better built. So that's driving differentiation for our consumer that creates a differentiation against the competitive set that they can buy today. So it could be appearance, could be a texture, taste, flavor, could be health and wellness. So permissibility could be lower sugar, lower saturated fat, lower sodium, things like that. But it's really technologies and ingredients and packaging that creates that differentiation on shelf. The next big area is really transforming distribution. We have a very broad supply chain, and currently we use a route salesman. All the employees, when you're in a grocery store or 7-Eleven and see someone stocking PepsiCo product, whether it's a Pepsi or Doritos, that's a PepsiCo employee, and right now that's a big advantage for us. But as mega cities proliferate and people move and urbanize even further, that could eventually be a detriment to our business. So we're always looking for ways to sell our products in new ways. So looking for technologies around the point of sale, always looking for different at-home applications like SodaStream. If you're familiar with that, that's an example of sort of a make my own at-home soda appliance. I think Keurig is another example, right? Nespresso and Keurig. Then we have the large asset base of aging assets. Some of our equipment was installed in the 60s and 70s, and so when we build new lines or even retrofit existing lines, we try and get asset flexibility so it can make more than one product or more than one SKU at least. And then ultimately, we know consumers like things that are locally relevant for them. So how can you take mass customization and really localize it so each consumer feels like they're getting a snack or a beverage created specifically for them. The next big area is I just labeled holistic sourcing, and really this is our some of our performance with purpose agenda. So it has all our reducing our greenhouse gases, improving our water sustainability efforts, energy efficiency, and one big area of that is really we generate a lot of agricultural waste. As you look at orange peels or oat hulls or potato peels, coconut husks, all that raw agricultural waste material right now is just being used for animal feed. But could we find a higher value stream for that waste product to create, whether it's specialty chemicals, fibers for packaging, as well as a big area obviously is the end of life of our products and ensuring compostability, biodegradability, or recyclability of all our packaging materials, who would be our target. The final big areas are really around digital efficiencies, and I know it's a buzzword, but I call this the Internet of our things. And so it's how do we get some of that digital benefit as people become more aware of whether it's their electronic medical records or just their nutritional needs. How can we tie that into the purchasing of our products and even driving some of our customization and product development? Also, again, as we transform our distribution cycle, how does that influence our logistics to ensure that as consumers get product off shelf or get product that there's just-in-time demand for product to replace it. I think one area that would be my sort of gold state would be right now in our process plants, we collect a lot of data about like moisture, temperatures, time, all the different processing characteristics that we collect on our manufacturing equipment, as many industries do, and that's all put in S&PM, SPC sort of process control charts, and then we spend a lot of time collecting consumer data and consumer feedback. But right now, there's no way to tie those two together. It'd be great if we could actually use our production sensors to drive consumer preference. I'll give you an example. We know consumers desire a certain texture on potato chips, for example. They like a crisp, not soggy or stale chip. We measure moisture content because that's a good proxy for texture, but not truly measuring texture. So could you get to a measurement that actually drives to the variable the consumer cares about? All right, next slide, please. So now I'll spend a little bit of time. I won't have too much time to really go into great depth on any of these, but give you a little bit of idea of some of our food wants right now. So the first is, spoke a little bit about this in the previous slide, differentiated packaging. So that's new formats. It could be custom digital printing. You've seen the emoji campaign or names and pictures on bags of chips and stuff like that. It's so really getting it to, again, unique customization on demand. Functionality could be things for our dip jars. As you age, you lose some of that strength in your wrist, so lower torque opening salsa jar, and then recyclability, of course, with our performance with purpose targets. We would like all our packaging to be biodegradable or recyclable. So that can be a challenge given the moisture and oxygen barrier we need to make sure our products don't degrade while they're on shelf. Next is really looking at advantage plant ingredients, specifically around protein. You probably all had protein bars, and as you increase the protein content of food, it typically can drive off flavors, poor texture, and we're looking for a high quality, low cost, that's got good bioavailability plant protein that doesn't suffer from those same challenges, so we can make an effective high protein food or snack that consumers prefer. Next, as we move to cleaner labels and things like that consumers request, we're always looking for natural preservatives, natural colors, as well as other functional ingredients. As you pull sugar out of products, you have to have something to replace the sugar from a mass standpoint. So, what other functional ingredients can we have? The next one is really around. We do spend a lot of our time mechanically modifying our foods and beverages, but we haven't really extensively looked at other types of, whether it's biofermentation. We're starting to see a little bit of that now with the kombuchas and things like that, as well as enzymatic modification. We've done a little bit of work with enzymes on an ingredient base, but not an enzymatic modification to an end product itself. And so I think it's a rich space when you look at chemical reactions. For example, could there be a reaction on a granola bar that is, as you masticate it, it goes through an exothermic type reaction and heats up a little bit. So I think that we're starting to see some of that in the industry, where you have ice cream that changes color based on the pH of your tongue and things like that. But it's really still at the nascent and early levels, and that's definitely, I think, an area that can drive differentiation. The next one is big for our snacks business, and we spend a lot of energy and money in removing water from substrates to make them portable and easier to snack on. So baking, frying, roasting, microwave drying, things like that. But what's interesting is the method of dehydration often also drives the texture of that final finished product. And some of these technologies that we now use were taken from other industries and commercialized to make food. So if you look at Cheetos, for example, that's made on an extrusion process, which is very similar to the thermoplastic extruders. And so we're always looking for new methods of making food and dehydrating. So that brings me to the next one around different processes. So could you do, and we know you can do, injection molding of food? Can you blow mold food, things like that? Again, taking a commercial process that was developed for something else and applying it to make a unique texture or unique taste for the food industry. So we're always interested in those type of processes. The next one gives you an example, and I sort of talked about it on the last slide around the texture sensor. We're looking for methods of doing non-invasive or minimally invasive characterization of our product. The challenge is right now with video imaging and all the quality insurance work that we do, it's all at the end of the process where we've already spent the money to buy the raw ingredient, in this case a potato. We've already spent all the money frying it or drying it down uh, to then reject, uh, where it's maybe too dark because the sugars were too high. If we had a non-invasive way to do that upstream of all that work, maybe even at the farm, where we could deselect that potato and instead of going to one of our plants to make potato chips, maybe it goes to a hash brown facility. Even though we own our own farms, we could sell that to some other non-competitive organizations. So I think that broadly what the challenge is here is we're always looking for a novel sensing technique that gives us more information, one, to control our process, but then also to make it more efficient and improve product quality. The next one is really around, again, performance with purpose and reducing some of the fat content, specifically saturated fat in our products. We know consumers really like the fried texture, and it always rates really high in their purchase intent. And frying also is a great heat transfer media, so that it's very efficient from a heat transfer standpoint. We're doing work in other food grade fluids that have a high flash point that again don't have the same fat content as edible oils, but produce that same nice texture when used for frying. Finally, the last one on the snacks side and the food side is really around coating. You've probably eaten some of our snacks and noticed the seasoning comes off on your fingers. If it's coming off on your fingers, you can imagine what our conveyors and our plant equipment looks like. Lots of seasoning everywhere, and so that's one of our more expensive ingredients on a per pound basis. And so we're looking for ways to improve adhesion efficiency of those particles, as well as when we move to, instead of spray dried powder, when we start moving to flakes of peppers and things like that, those are even harder to adhere to snack food because of their high surface area and low density. Makes them fluidize very easy and very difficult to stick onto the product surface. A lot of edible adhesives today are aqueous based, so think starch solutions, which is great in a high moisture system. But for us, when you're dehydrating food, you don't want to then use an aqueous based adhesive that then requires a subsequent secondary dehydration step as well. So we're really looking for low energy. So it could be something like the UV cured epoxies used in dental applications as an example. Okay, next slide, please. For beverage, I just wanted to take you through some of the same type of challenges, but now on our beverage side of the business. The first is really around plastic. Obviously, reducing the volume of PET we use would be a huge win. And so there's a few different ways of going after that. There could be processing technologies that improve the crystallinity so it's stronger and produces better barrier, so we can use less, or even new polymers. PET just happened to be a polymer with very good barrier properties for beverage, and so that's why it became widely used. But are there others that we can use and then drive through the economies of scale to get it down to the affordability level we require? And then we're constantly looking for better recyclable biopolymers. Uh, PHA, for example, we just funded a startup around PHA, marine degradable polymers. I think one of the challenges with all the K-cups and things like that is the biodegradability or recyclability of those pods. That if we get into that type of model, that's obviously a concern for us as well. The third point is similar to that. What drives a lot of the polymers used and sometimes the metallizing is really getting to the barrier we require. So for our shelf life, that we're able to maintain the same as produced quality throughout the shelf life. So if we can find alternative barrier technologies that are economical, sometimes that allows using some of these more affordable renewable plastics or even different polymers. Reducing sugar content is a big driver for many of our consumers in today's market. We're always looking for natural uh, sweeteners. Stevia is a great example when it was found. A lot of those sweeteners that we find that are non-caloric, even when they come from nature, often have, some people are very susceptible to it, but they have an aftertaste, a bitter, as well as modifying the mouthfeel and changing the viscosity some. So we're always looking not only for the alternative sweeteners, but also then some of these other products that could help reduce some of the negative organoleptic properties of the alternative sweeteners. A big challenge for us on the beverage side is the amount of water we use, not only in processing, but water is our number one ingredient by mass on the beverage side of the business. And right now we use reverse osmosis, which is sort of the gold standard of water filtration and sterilization. But it's very expensive and it leaves a lot of brine as well. So we're looking for other methods, especially in water-strapped countries such as India and Africa. Is there inexpensive filtration method that could really allow that water to be consumed on a mass scale? The next one's really around a challenge that we have for some of our microdosed ingredients. When you look at a beverage recipe, there could be sometimes you're dosing in things at parts per million. And when you're doing big continuous vats of several thousand gallons, that can be a challenge to accurately scale that and then ensure that it's mixed uniformly in those very large batch tanks. And so finding technologies that allow for microdosing are very critical. But the next one is around novel sterilization technologies. And so that's really looking at the cold pressed beverage is one example. So high pressure processing is a way to not expose the beverage to any high temperatures during the pasteurization process. We're looking for other techniques that can do it and do it in a more efficacious manner and at a lower cost. So we're always looking for, we're never going to compromise on food safety, but can we find technologies that can sterilize at the level we require and still produce a higher quality product? Finally, where many of our consumers engage on the beverage side is when in a vending machine or at the cooler at like 7-Eleven or a grocery store. So can we advance those technologies, one, to make them more interactive with the consumer, but also potentially, again, where energy is a challenge, instead of chilling multiple cases per day, you can do chill on demand. And so the consumer buys an individual soda or a 6-pack, 12-pack, whatever, warm, and they can quickly chill on demand. Next slide, please. That was a broad overview of a lot of our needs. And what I'll say is those are sort of our articulated needs. Sometimes we don't know what to ask for because our consumers don't know what to ask for. I like the quotes I show here from Steve Jobs and Henry Ford. Henry Ford, if he would have asked his consumers what they wanted, they would have said, a faster horse. They wouldn't have been able to articulate, I really would like a new method of locomotion. Could you invent the internal combustion engine? Our consumers are the same. They always say, I just want a new snack. They can't put that into words what that means. I think Keurig, again, is a good model. If you would ask people 10 years ago if they would have been interested in an expensive coffee machine that makes individual cups of coffee from a small plastic pod, they would have said no. But they've made a very big business off of it. So I think we always look for interesting technologies, and some of the startups that we've worked with have come from other non-food and beverage industries, because while the startup may not know where their technology fits or don't understand the application, that's where we can work with them to say, your technology is interesting. Did you ever think about applying it to this to solve that problem? So again, I think that's where I'll close. Again, I am on the selection committee, and sometimes when I review some of the submissions, that's where I have those discussions. But we've met many interesting startups at the demo days, and we can have those conversations. And if you're interested in working with PepsiCo, I would encourage you to apply before the deadline.
Okay, thank you very much, Austin, for your presentation today. And I'd like to point everyone to let you know that we are recording the session, and there is we archive pretty much all the information like in these webinars, so you can review them later on. So if you just go to our webinar page and check out the archives that we have here, you should be able to see all the corporate needs broadcasts. The schedule is down here, and you can view all the videos also down here. This is what I mentioned earlier, where you could subscribe to our YouTube channel so you could watch, some of the past corporate videos that we've done over the last couple of weeks. All right. So I'll move now to some questions. We have about 15 minutes left. We have a few questions lined up, so hopefully, we can get through all of them today. So Austin, I'm gonna read out the question to you, and we have about 10 questions lined up. So I'll just give you a prompt if we're running out of time. So, our first question is from an angel investor asking about the timeline from your interest in the startup to an exit. As an angel interested in investing in companies you're interested in, I need to know how many years my money will be tied up.
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends on, obviously it's a case by case basis, and it depends on the individual startup and what their technology is. When you look at some of the startups that we've worked with, it is typically a 3 to 5 year plan before it first commercializes. And in some instances, that was commercialization included PepsiCo acquisition. Sometimes we just take an equity stake. Sometimes we're just a customer, and we help them get more funding and things like that. But for us, from the first initial discussions to when that's commercialized in one of our products or on one of our production lines, it's typically 3 to 5 years.
All right, thank you. So our next question is, do you look at federal technology? Oh, do you look at federal lab technologies? If so, what are the transaction models you use to commercialize the technologies?
Yeah, so we do look at, we go to the FLC and we work with federal labs, not only in the United States, but in other countries as well. And the transaction can be a little bit more challenging than some universities. It depends on the lab and it depends on the technology. Obviously, there's some government incentives for U.S. companies to benefit from the technology development in the federal labs. We prefer to do acquisition as opposed to royalties, and the those are more just because it's hard for us to track royalties in all our different areas and the challenges involved. So we try and do upfront payments whenever we can. So that's our typical transaction model.
All right, thank you. How important is having the researchers available to work with you if you're interested in a university technology or patent?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it's at the start of the project. It's sometimes paramount to be able to have that. Sometimes we go into just a sponsored research project to really, especially if the patent or technology was planned for a different industry, we do a little bit of exploratory to prove it in our field of use. I would say so. Having those kickoff meetings and that handoff period is critical for success. When I look and think about every technology that we've commercialized from the university, there was definitely that handoff. Uh, Sometimes when you're just working with the tech transfer office, it can be a little bit challenging to find the proper people. But I think it's very important for our stakeholders to talk to the principals involved to be able to fully understand the technology and give it the highest probability of success.
Okay, our next question is, are you looking for alternative oils like canola-based oils?
We use canola-based oils in many countries. So yes, we're always interested in alternative edible oils. I mean, we've even looked at algae oils and things like that. So I think we're open to all oils. Uh, I think there's many different factors besides cost. Obviously, supply and it being uh, one of the challenges with some of the oils is make sure that the people that are harvesting are being treated humanitarily is a big challenge for us as well, because we have certain requirements that we demand of our suppliers, as well as oxidation and just volume of supply. But yes, to answer the question, we're interested in most edible oils.
All right, I think we have two or three questions left, Austin. Um, Here's another question. Where else do you look for innovation aside from universities?
When we look at our partner ecosystem, we typically have it into four large buckets. So first, we definitely have academic institutions. Uh, the next is suppliers, and so some of those include our big multinational strategic suppliers, but also small and medium enterprises as well. Uh, the next bucket is what I call inventor network. So that includes some of our crowdsourcing alternatives, but also in our inventor network, the people on that team are looking at government labs, they're looking at contract research organizations, sometimes interacting with NGOs and government agencies, typically the Ministry for Economic Development or the Economic Development Corporation. They've been very helpful in sourcing innovation external to the U.S., as well as looking at individual external technology scouts as well. We'll build a network and sometimes they'll broker a third party introduction. And so these open innovation intermediaries, as I call them, could be companies or individuals that are in that space of sourcing technology. And the final bucket that we use to source partners is really in venture capital and startups. So we work with incubators, we work with VC firms. We're founding partners in some VCs, but really it's about getting exposure to a wide array of portfolio companies to see where they can be helpful.
Our next question is, how successful are you with sourcing technologies from universities?
I would say we're getting better over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. I think, especially in the U.S. Prior to that, a lot of our university work was done, just to be candid, was done in Europe and other areas where they were more focused on educating the students than owning all the IP. And when we when we do sponsored research, uh, normally we want to own the IP in our field of use. We don't want to go through a 3-year program and then at the end you can take it to Coke. Uh, but now more U.S. universities have started to change their engagement model, and so we have been more successful with sourcing technologies from universities. But I think that's a big reason why NCIT and other organizations are critical, because as companies spin out of the university, that's a great place for us to engage because they have more flexibility sometimes. Land grant universities can be hogtied on IP and negotiations at sometimes. So that's why we prefer organizations like NCIT as well.
Okay, we have, let me do a quick count here. I think we have four questions left. Let's see if we can just plow through them really quickly. Some of them are really good questions. Here's the next one. It goes back to, it's a technology question about farm improvements. Are you looking for better fertilizers?
Sure. Yeah. So our crop science team is definitely looking for better fertilizers that uh, are more efficacious with lower amount. They're looking at anything from crop rotation, sometimes like uh, citrus greening is a big challenge. A uh, uh, lot of work around how do you kill the insects that drive that into the fruit tree? How do you cure it if once it's infected? Things like that. So yeah, it spans irrigation, sensors, fertilizer, storage of potatoes, very broad, a lot of different uh, technologies that we're interested in.
Okay. Our next question is, any interest in licensing high yielding potato varieties? If yes, which market are you looking to use the new potato variety?
So yield is just one factor that we look at in sourcing new varieties. We do license varieties. A lot of the varieties we use today were developed, they're proprietary varieties developed by Frito-Lay. Uh, but we're always looking for new varieties. Low low asparagine and reducing sugars is important, especially as you go into other tubers besides just potatoes. So we've done some work with North Carolina State around sweet potatoes, and so broadly interested in definitely looking at new varietals, not just in potatoes. I would say it's really, since we're active all over the world and have potato chip manufacturing all over the world, it's an interest in most countries around the world. The biggest challenge outside the U.S. is some of the places we want to sell snacks aren't the best climates for growing potatoes. So definitely interested in arid varieties and uh, crops that grow well in those type of water stressed areas.
Okay. Our second to the last question. With the new local sourcing movement, how does your company work with local small companies?
Yeah, I was sort of discussing that a little bit around the localization. We know flavor and ingredient desire changes all over the world, and eating what you're familiar with resonates with consumers. And so that's definitely something we're working on is how do you engage small to medium companies that can supply regional differentiation and high quality on a regional level, and just may never be of interest in other parts of the world. So you may not need that true global source. And so in some of our markets, that's how many of our supplier engagements begin, is working with those local partners to provide preferred services and costing structure. And if it does end up being a global something we can leverage in other markets, then we'll work with that company to grow and sort of help them incubate. So we have global quality standards, but each each regional procurement team is allowed to source what they believe is best, given that they can can meet our quality requirements and food safety requirements.
Okay, and this is our last question. I think it's a good question to wrap up today's webinar. Do you have advice for universities wanting to improve market alignment of their startups or technologies?
Yeah, I think and we're sometimes guilty of it as well. I think we spend so much time trying to contractually cover the next Google or the next billion-dollar idea. Sometimes we spend way too much time and just miss opportunity to do some good work and do some good research. Uh, so sure, I'd love to find the next billion-dollar brand, but I'm also fine finding the next $20 million brand. Finding lots of those is still sustainable for our business, and so I try and focus on getting output that is deliverable to the business as quickly as possible, because that's the biggest challenge for us is knowing that it takes that 3 to 5 year gap to fully commercialize. If there's things that can be done to de-risk that or shorten that time frame with commercial partners, that's probably the quickest way for us. So whether that's getting generally recognized as safe or GRAS approval for ingredients, there's steps that a university can start taking to make a technology more attractive to commercial partners. And I think a lot of that, at least in the food and beverage market, is around some of the regulatory hurdles that are expensive and take a long time. And I think universities, being on the academic side, sometimes underestimate or don't appreciate those challenges in full.
Okay, those are all our questions today. And thank you again, Austin, for joining us this afternoon. We're running out of time, but before we go, I just want to remind everyone that, the deadline to submit for the demo day, and Austin is part of our 25-person corporate selection committee. And as you've seen, he put in very good detail what PepsiCo is looking for in the food, in their food branch and beverages, as well as other auxiliary services that they may need from source to distribution. So um, so the next deadline, or the first deadline rather, the early deadline is July 14th. So hopefully people listening to the call are able to digest what was presented today and are able to go through their portfolios, look at their startups, and look at their IP in order for them to submit just in time for the early deadline on July 14th. There is, of course, a second deadline, but I always recommend that people submit early just so we have enough time to organize your application and to help you if we see any errors or if you need assistance with submitting to us. Um, and this webinar is actually a series of broadcasts on how you can work with the corporations or with the corporates, specifically those that are in our selection committee. So after July 4th, we have a we have a very interesting lineup of presentations, starting on July 6th with Pfizer. Then we have BASF, Eastman Chemical Company comes next, Printpack on July 20th. And on the 24th, it's GlaxoSmithKline. And on the 31st, we have Schlumberger. This broadcast schedule will be updated, as soon as we have more corporate scheduled. But we do recommend that, if you're from the tech transfer office or if you're from the Office of Research in the university, get your researchers and get your licensing people in these webinars so they can hear what the corporates are looking for. All right. So I hope everyone enjoyed today's session. And Austin, thank you again very much for joining us and giving us,
Oh, no problem.
yeah, we know how busy you are, but thank you again for doing this this afternoon.
Well, thank you, everyone, for your time. I appreciate it.
All
Good
right.
luck.
So, okay, thank you. So have a good afternoon and thanks again for joining us. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Bye.